It begins with the sound of footsteps echoing on the cobblestones of an old Polish street. The air is cold. Winter has come early and the war has already stolen the warmth from the world. A young woman walks quickly through the fog carrying a small brown bag. Her name is Irena Sendler. She is 29 years old, a social worker by title, but in truth something far greater. She carries no weapon, no armor, only a heart that refuses to surrender to fear. Every day she crosses from the safety of the city into the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto where thousands of Jewish families are trapped behind barbed wire. She walks in as if she belongs there, though she knows that discovery means death. Inside the ghetto she sees faces that have forgotten what sunlight feels like. Children too thin to cry. Mothers whose eyes hold both love and despair. Irena kneels beside a child named Adam and whispers that she has a plan. The boy does not speak. He only watches her with eyes that ask if he can still believe in kindness. Irena touches his hand and smiles. That smile will become the key that opens hundreds of locked hearts. She finds a way. Using her position as a social worker, she convinces the guards she needs to inspect sanitation and prevent disease. Hidden inside her toolbox she carries hope in the shape of forged documents and small doses of medicine. She begins to smuggle children out. One at a time at first, then 2, then 10. Each rescue is a heartbeat away from disaster. She hides infants inside burlap sacks, older children inside coffins, toolboxes, potato sacks, or beneath the seats of ambulances. Dogs bark as the guards check each cart. Sometimes she sprinkles pepper on the children's clothes so the dogs will sneeze and lose their scent. Outside the ghetto walls she gives each child a new name and a new family. She writes their real names carefully on small slips of paper, places them inside jars, and buries the jars beneath an apple tree in her neighbor's garden. One day, she believes, when the war ends, she will dig them up and reunite the children with their parents. It is a promise she whispers into the cold night again and again. Remember who you are. Remember the love that waits for you. But the war does not end quickly. Each day grows darker. Irena's small network of helpers is hunted. The Gestapo learns that someone is rescuing children. They call her code name Jolanta and they want her dead. She keeps going anyway. Every step she takes feels heavier, every heartbeat louder. Yet she knows that even in this silence of fear, a single act of kindness can echo louder than any gunshot. One night she is stopped by 2 soldiers. They demand her papers. She hands them over with shaking hands but steady eyes. The taller one stares too long. Her heart stops. Then a truck passes behind them, its headlights cutting across their faces. In that brief flash she sees something human in the soldier's eyes, a flicker of doubt, perhaps mercy. He returns her papers. She walks away without looking back. Years later one of the children she saved will remember that moment through another story. Her name is Ruth and she was 6 when Irena carried her out wrapped in a blanket. She remembers the smell of fear, the rough wool against her cheek, and the whisper of a woman's voice saying you will live, you will see the sky again. Ruth grew up in a small farmhouse outside the city, never knowing her real name until after the war. When she finally learns the truth, she says she never forgot that voice even though she heard it only once. Irena keeps saving children. Dozens become hundreds. She is not a saint, she says later, only someone who could not close her eyes. The work consumes her. She dreams of names, faces, small shoes left behind. She keeps a notebook in her pocket where she sketches the initials of the ones she cannot save. Each letter is a prayer. She wakes before dawn most days because the mornings are quieter, and quieter means safer. She washes her hands slowly as if trying to erase the fear that clings to her skin. Then she walks again through the broken streets with that same small bag pressed against her chest. Inside it are scraps of paper and a child's toy meant to calm whoever she carries next. She no longer counts how many she has saved because counting makes her think about those she has lost, and that is too heavy to bear. The city around her is a skeleton of smoke and rubble, yet in the middle of all that ruin she still hears children laugh, sometimes small bursts of sound that remind her the world is not completely dead. She believes that if even one child can still laugh, then there is still something worth saving. One winter evening she meets a woman in the ghetto holding a baby barely alive. The mother knows what Irena offers, a chance for her child to live even if she herself will not. The mother kisses her baby one last time and hands him over without a word. Irena takes him, hides him under her coat, and walks into the night. That tiny heartbeat against her chest becomes the only sound she can hear. Later she will tell someone that she felt as if she was carrying the future of the world in her arms. But the walls are closing in. The Gestapo arrests people every day. Irena's friends warn her to stop to save herself. She smiles faintly and says, "How can I stop breathing?" She is finally caught in October 1943. They drag her to prison. They break her legs, they break her arms. They ask for the names of the children. She refuses every question. She gives them nothing. They beat her again and again until she falls unconscious. Still she does not speak. One of the men in the underground bribed a guard and she is listed as executed, but she lives. They smuggle her out under a new name. She hides in a small apartment, and from that bed she continues her work. Her body is broken but her will is untouched. She sends messages through scraps of cloth, through whispered notes, through strangers who owe her nothing. When the war ends, the city is quiet for the first time in years. She goes to the garden where she buried the jars. She kneels by the apple tree and begins to dig. The earth is cold and heavy. She finds the glass, one jar then another, each filled with tiny pieces of paper, each name a heartbeat waiting to be returned. She cries not for what she has done but for those she cannot find. Some of the children are still alive, some are not. Some have new families and cannot remember who they were. She searches for years, reconnecting name after name. Sometimes she meets them as adults. They look into her eyes and try to see the face they once knew as children. One man tells her, "I remember the smell of soap and the sound of your breath. That was enough to keep me alive." Decades pass. Irena grows older. The world changes and people begin to forget, but she remembers everything. She keeps the old photographs hidden in a wooden box. She says each one is a doorway to a moment when the world could have gone either way, toward despair or toward hope, and she chose hope every time. In her final years, reporters come to interview her. They ask how she found the courage. She shakes her head and says, "I was not brave. The brave ones were the mothers who gave me their children knowing they might never see them again." One of those children, now a grandmother herself, speaks of her on a quiet afternoon. Her voice trembles as she remembers the woman who whispered in her ear that she would see the sky again. She says that whenever she looks at her own grandchildren, she thinks of the apple tree and of the woman who planted hope beneath it. In the small apartment where Irena spends her last days, sunlight still finds its way through the curtains. She listens to the laughter of children outside and smiles. Her body is frail, but her eyes still carry that same spark, the same quiet fire that once defied an empire. She says softly that the only thing stronger than fear is love. Years later, a museum builds a small exhibit in her honor. People walk past photographs of her, the jars, the lists of names, and some of them cry quietly. A mother bends down to explain to her child who this woman was and why her story matters. The child listens, eyes wide as if hearing a fairy tale, but this is not a fairy tale. This is the truth of what one heart can do. When the lights dim, the guide plays a recording of Irena's own words. She says, "If you see someone drowning, you must jump in and save them, even if you cannot swim, because doing nothing is worse than failing." Outside the museum, the world is still noisy and fast and careless, but sometimes in the hush of evening someone remembers her name, a teacher, a nurse, a mother, someone who chooses kindness when it would be easier to look away, and in that small moment she lives again. Her story moves through generations, carried by voices that were once silent, children who learned that even in the darkest times there can be hands that reach out to lift you from the shadows. The rescued children tell their children that once upon a time there was a woman who believed that goodness could win. Irena Sendler saved nearly 300 lives. She saved their laughter, their future, their place in this world, and she did it not with power or weapons but with compassion. Her footsteps still echo in the quiet places of history, reminding us that one person can always make a difference. And when the night feels too heavy and the world seems too cruel, her story whispers softly through time, telling us that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to act with love anyway. Part 3 begins quietly in the memory of a world that has already changed. The war long ended, the streets rebuilt, the children grown old, yet somewhere in the soft corners of memory there is still the sound of footsteps on cobblestones, the echo of a woman walking through fog carrying a bag close to her chest. Ruth, the little girl who once hid beneath a blanket, now sits by her own window. She looks at the apple tree that she planted many years ago. She whispers to her grandchild about a woman named Irena who told her she would see the sky again. The child listens with eyes wide and full of wonder, and Ruth tells her that sometimes heroes do not wear uniforms, sometimes they wear simple coats and walk with quiet hearts. She says that the greatest power in the world is not in the hands that take life but in the hands that save it. In another city, a man named Adam sits in a library. He was one of the children too. He found his real name on a faded list written in Irena's careful handwriting. He touches the paper as if it were a living thing and closes his eyes. He imagines her handwriting that day, the way she might have whispered each letter before hiding it in the jar. He has a family now, and he tells his children that their names are safe because one woman believed that names mattered more than fear. The world has built statues and written books, but Irena's real monument is not made of stone. It is made of lives, breathing, laughing, walking beneath the open sky. She never asked for fame, and when people called her a hero she only smiled and said, "I simply did what needed to be done." She lived quietly until the end, surrounded by flowers and photographs of those who once were children. Her room was small but filled with light, as if the world itself was saying thank you. Years after her passing, a young student finds her story online. The girl has never heard of her before. She listens to the recording of Irena's voice, old but steady, saying that doing nothing is the worst thing a person can do. The student sits there in the dark of her room and feels something move inside her, a thought, a spark. She writes a letter to her teacher. She says, "Maybe I can do something small for someone too." The story keeps moving through time, past like a flame that never goes out. People who never met her still feel the warmth of what she did. A doctor who stays late to help one last patient, a neighbor who takes in a stray child, a teacher who notices when someone is alone, all of them guided by a truth that began in that cold winter many decades ago. If you listen closely, you can almost hear her voice in the rhythm of the world. She speaks through the laughter of children, through the kindness of strangers, through the quiet courage of those who choose to care. She reminds us that goodness is never wasted. It travels, it survives, it finds new hearts to live in. When the seasons change and the apple trees bloom again somewhere in Poland, a breeze moves through their branches and the petals fall like snow across the ground. Beneath the roots are the ghosts of the jars once buried there, and though the paper inside them has faded, the names remain carried now in the air itself, as if the world remembers. A mother stands beneath one of those trees holding her own child close. She tells the story in a whisper. She says, "There was once a woman who risked everything so that mothers like me could still hold their children." She says this while the wind moves softly through the leaves and her child listens without knowing why. The story makes her heart feel bigger. Every story of courage has a moment of silence at its center, a breath where fear could have won but didn't. Irena's life was made of those moments. She faced walls, guns and cruelty, yet she found a way to make love stronger than fear. She showed that even one person can be a bridge between darkness and light. The rescued children lived on. They became teachers, doctors, parents. They built families, they planted trees. They passed on her name like a quiet prayer. They said her name not in grief but in gratitude, because every heartbeat they carried was proof that her faith in humanity had been right. So when we think the world is too cruel, when we begin to believe that kindness is too small to matter, remember her walking through the cold streets, her hands trembling but her eyes steady. Remember the sound of her whisper promising a child that they will see the sky again. Remember that courage is not born from power, it is born from love. And when the story ends, it does not end at all. It keeps breathing. It lives in the way we choose to look at each other with compassion instead of suspicion. It lives in the moments when we choose to act when it would be easier to turn away. Irena Sendler's story is not about history alone, it is about what it means to be human. She saved nearly 300 children from death, but she saved far more from forgetting what mercy looks like. She proved that light can exist even in the darkest times, and that the smallest act of love can ripple through generations until it becomes something eternal. The world continues to turn, the children's children grow old, the apple trees still bloom, and somewhere in that quiet bloom you can still feel her presence, a whisper that says be kind, be brave, and never be afraid to save a life.